Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on what time zone you're in. Thank you so much for joining us for the Winter Adtech virtual event, and a special thank you to Smart Ad Server for putting all of this together. My name is Christiana, and I run an organization called AdLedger, which is a nonprofit consortium of about 90 of some of the most powerful brands, agencies, publishers, and technology companies in our space. And our goal is to build out open source technology that uses blockchain and cryptography to increase the integrity of the advertising ecosystem. Today, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what cryptography is and how it will be applied in the quote unquote post cookie world. But before we get to that, it's the season of bold predictions. So my bold prediction here today is that in the next 2 to 5 years, independent ad tech as we know it will collapse, and all of us, me included, will be working for a walled garden like Google or Facebook. And you might think that that's a little bit hyperbolic or cynical, but I have some data to back that up. Google's Chrome is the largest browser by market share. Just about 3/4 of humans who use the internet access it via Chrome's browser. And a few months ago, they made the announcement that third-party cookies will be deprecated across its browser in the next few years. They've since walked this back, but the long and short of it is that sooner rather than later, third-party cookies are going away. And the ad tech ecosystem was not thrilled. Cookies are a really important part of the way that we do business today. They're critical to the way that we understand our consumers, the way that we facilitate product discovery, and the way that we push our consumers down the marketing funnel. And so the reaction was really, wow, if all of us don't figure out a new way to do things, our revenue will be impacted by this. But of course, we know our revenue has been impacted by the actions of Google and Facebook for years now. In 2019, 70% of all ad dollars that were spent on the internet went to either Google or Facebook, and the rest of us had to fight over the remaining 30%. And so when you're looking at this chart, you could really understand why there was this visceral reaction to the cookie, a really critical tool for us to use to compete with these guys, being sent away and being deprecated. So as a member of the industry, as someone who works for the independent ad tech world, I was apprehensive. But as a consumer, I couldn't help but be a little bit happy, because how many times have you looked at a product online, maybe just one time, and then that product proceeded to stalk you all over the internet for months, maybe even after you purchased that product? This experience is not only annoying, it's a privacy issue. And it's part of the reason that we're seeing governments from the EU to California pass sweeping legislation designed to empower consumers to have better control over how their data is used online. So how do we get to this really kind of chaotic place where people are arguing that we could potentially be at odds with our own government and our own consumers if we don't figure out a better way? I think cookies get a lot of the attention, but something that's less discussed, but a big part of this conversation is OpenRTB itself. So a little bit of a ad tech history lesson here. The very first ad ever placed online was placed in 1994 by AT&T on Wire.com. And in order for that to happen, only those two companies needed to be involved. Someone at Wired called AT&T and said, hey, we have this great new medium, a new opportunity for advertising. Are you interested? AT&T says yes, and the rest is history. So it happened the same way that TV and radio and newspapers were sold. So it was a very much a one-to-one transaction, only AT&T and Wired involved. And so as we know, this went well, our industry was born and marketers wanted more. And so to accommodate that need, a new class of companies called ad networks evolved. And their model was pretty simple. They would go to publishers and say, hey, I know you're not selling out 100% of your inventory, so why don't you sell what's left over to me at the end of the month for a discount? So let's say you were getting $10 from AT&T directly, why don't you sell what's left over to me for $5? And then they would turn around to advertisers and say, hey, I know you're looking for more inventory. I can tell you exactly where this inventory will be, what it is, but it's super high quality, it's premium, and I'll give it to you for a discount. So let's say instead of the $10, they'll sell it to the advertisers for $8. And so in this scenario, really everyone was winning for a while. The publisher was getting something instead of nothing for their remnant inventory. The advertiser got more reach and scale by being on a bunch of different sites, and they got a discount, and the ad network made a margin. But then two things happened that really ended this practice to a large extent. The first one is that our networks got greedy, pretty straightforward. And instead of putting truly premium inventory in what they were marketing as premium packages, they took advantage of the opacity that the publishers insisted on to protect their direct sales business. And they put lower quality inventory into these packages in order to fatten their margins. And then the second thing that happened, in a word, was data. So in 2007, the iPhone is invented, and all of a sudden we have this device that consumers carried around on their person in the real physical world. They use it to interact with their friends. They use it to interact with content. They use it to search for and even buy products that they wanted. So this level of data was a marketer's dream, but it really was only valuable if we were able to figure out a way to action on it, to use it. And so just about 1 million companies popped up to accommodate that demand from marketers. And so all of these companies, dozens of them sometimes, needed to collaborate on the same ad campaigns, even the same impressions. And so by definition, a common language that different entities use to communicate to accomplish a shared task is a protocol. And in advertising, our protocol is OpenRTB. And OpenRTB is a really amazing innovation. It's the first time that we're able to ingest and analyze and respond to hundreds of thousands, even millions of ad requests every second. And that's really exciting. It's a really big deal. But as with any exciting innovation, there are some drawbacks. So we know that there are issues with fraud. We have discrepancies where, the governing bodies of Adtech say that 10% discrepancies between what a publisher thinks they should be paid and what an advertiser thinks they should be paying are okay, which, when you think about it, is really kind of insane, right? I mean, impressions are our currency. Imagine if a bank just lost 10% of its assets overnight and everyone just kind of shrugged. But it happens in our space. There are conflicts of interest where one company will serve more than one function in this ecosystem. We have issues with user experience, but for the purposes of our talk today, the biggest issue with this ecosystem is that it all is powered by cookies. Cookies are its lifeblood, and now they're going away. And so that's why I felt comfortable making that big, sweeping, provocative statement at the beginning of our talk, that independent ad tech is in such grave danger unless we find a new way. And at AdLedger, we think we found a new way, a way that you might be surprised has been around for decades and even centuries. And that's cryptography. So cryptography sounds really complex and really confusing, but it's actually a really simple concept. It's the study and practice of disguising or encoding information in such a way so that only the intended receiver of that information can understand or decode it. And so this practice has been around forever. We had examples all around history of people scrambling the letters of the alphabet so that if something they wrote fell into the wrong hands, they wouldn't be able to understand it. But obviously it's come a long way since then. It's actually one of the foundational reasons that the internet was able to gain adoption so quickly. So when you're surfing the web, you might not know it, but cryptography is doing two really important things for you. So let's say you're shopping online and you go to make a purchase and you type in your credit card data. The reason that you feel comfortable doing that is because of cryptography. Cryptography is encrypting your data. So encryption cryptography is the same concept. Cryptography is encrypting the data that you type into your browser so that it can't be stolen from the browser itself. The second thing cryptography does for you is that it helps you to trust that someone is who they say they are on the internet. So for example, you don't have a fear that Amazon is not Amazon. You know for sure that you're on Amazon.com when you type that in. You don't worry, am I on an imposter Amazon? The reason that you don't worry about that is because of cryptography. The whole system that underpins identity validation on the web of entities is cryptography. And so for us at AdLedger, it really made perfect sense to kind of lift and shift this technology that had been so successful in an industry just adjacent to advertising like e-commerce and pull it into advertising itself. So that's what we did. We have built out an open source technical standard that we're calling Crypto-RTB. And you should think about this the same way that you would think about an ads.txt, for example, where it's a free open source tool set that anyone can use, anyone can implement in order to achieve a common goal. And so the goals for the standard in its first iteration are here. The first one is that we want to create an immutable identity for supply chain participants. Now that sounds confusing, but all it means is that we want to create technical proof that you are who you say you are in an ad transaction. And that might seem a little bit high level or simplistic, but when you think about the fact that we've never had technical proof that someone is who they say they are in an ad transaction, everything is based on self-attestation. It's pretty exciting. The second reason that's really exciting is because a lot of downstream issues like fraud stem from some kind of identity crisis. So take domain spoofing, for example. Domain spoofing is really just someone pretending they're someone else online. So Breitbart can say that they're the New York Times in order to gain the higher CPMs associated with the New York Times. That type of practice would be eliminated overnight using methodology like this, and other types of misrepresentation would be eliminated overnight. The second goal is to create an immutable chain of custody for impressions. So that just means we want to validate a chain of custody and be able to trace an impression all the way from buyer to seller. And so again, this might seem higher level or simplistic, but this is really important for two reasons. The first one being reconciliation. So those discrepancies that I mentioned earlier, if we had this verifiable chain of custody backed by cryptography, we wouldn't have those accounting issues. So we would, be a big kid industry who could keep track of our currency, which again is impressions. And that's a big deal. The second reason this is exciting is because of consent implications. So a lot of the industry trades have done great reporting around the way that consent strings are opening up a new front for the fight against fraud. So we're seeing fraudsters making it look like a consumer has opted into a type of advertising that in reality they did not. So huge legal implications for publishers and marketers who continue to target that consumer with those types of ads when they have opted out. But using this type of methodology, we'd be able to see if someone either removed or manipulated or eliminated a consent string at any point in the transaction. The third piece, which I think is where things get really exciting, is around the way that we access, transport, and validate the data that flies around this supply chain. For example, giving publishers tools to do things like encrypting their first-party data such that only parties they specifically permission downstream can decrypt that data. So when we were going about actually building this open technical standard, this was a list of things that we felt were necessary in order to gain adoption. So Crypto-RTB is backwards compatible with OpenRTB 2.x, forward compatible with 3.0. It's easy to deploy and for publishers, and for the buy side, there's really no active implementation work. You just need to audit the extra data that this will generate for you so that you can make sure that your campaigns are being faithfully executed. We also knew that it had to be super light on latency, and we have some ideas to make it even lighter that we're pretty excited about. So it's pretty early days. We just released our spec a couple months ago. It's available for anyone to download on adledger.org/standards. But we've already done a bunch of case studies that we're pretty excited about. The first one was in a typical media supply chain environment. So we had an SSP and a DSP create those digital signatures or those non-forgeable identities for themselves and their customers on the buy and sell side respectively. And the reason this was a really big deal is because the most common objection you hear when you talk about blockchain and cryptography in media is the QPS problem, saying that the technology will never keep up with the speed and the scale that media requires. And in this POC, we broke that barrier. So it's a really exciting proof that this technology will work at scale in production in our space. The reason it's not the end of the road is that allowing your partners to create digital signatures or your identity on your behalf is kind of like giving your friend power of attorney. You trust your friends, but you probably want to sign your own important stuff. So our next case study that we'll be releasing shortly does just that. We move the proof of identity, the digital signatures out to the edges. So actually having the publishers and the buy side create their own digital signatures, which we're really excited about. We have companies incorporating this into fraud detection and prevention technology. And then the third one, which I think is most exciting, is around content validation. So Verizon tapped Cryptography, tapped AdLedger to help create an application that helped validate that a specific entity said a specific thing at a specific time. So kind of a fake news play. So in Verizon's case, they, in the spirit of corporate transparency, they wanted to really kind of walk the walk, are committing to commit their press releases to the blockchain. And so CryptoRTB helps power that initiative by validating that, in this case, Verizon is Verizon. So it helps that identity validation of entities on the web piece. Pretty cool initiative. It's called Full Transparency. You can check it out on Verizon's website. So again, I think it's early days. We haven't figured out everything about what the future of our industry looks like. I don't think anyone has, but we do know that we're not going to get there unless we have an open dialogue and we collaborate. AdLedger was founded to be that forum for collaboration, and we hope you join us in that collaboration. So thank you so much for joining us at the Winter Adtech virtual event, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.